The Beast of Colombia, the Luis Garavito story. In the emerald landscapes of Colombia, where the Andes Mountains meet sprawling cities and rural communities, a darkness unlike any other crept through the streets in the 1990s. Luis Alfredo Garavito Cubillos, a man who would become known as La Bestia, the Beast, embarked on a killing spree that would claim the lives of at least 193 children, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in modern history. This is the story of how one man's horrific crimes terrorized a nation and exposed the vulnerabilities of Colombia's most defenseless citizens. To understand the magnitude of Garavito's crimes, we must first examine the Colombia of the 1990s, a nation torn apart by decades of civil war, drug cartels, and political instability. The ongoing conflict between government forces, left-wing guerrilla groups, and right-wing paramilitaries had displaced over 520,000 children, creating a vulnerable population of street children who lived largely invisible to society. During this period, Medellin was infamously known as the murder capital of the world, with the highest murder rate per capita globally. Children disappeared regularly from Colombia's streets, particularly those from impoverished backgrounds. Parents often feared reporting missing children due to potential retaliation from drug cartels, criminals, or corrupt police officers. In this chaotic environment, where violence was normalized and the vulnerable went unprotected, a predator could operate with devastating efficiency. Luis Alfredo Garavito was born on January 25, 1957, in Genova, Quindío, in western Colombia. He was the eldest of 7 children in a household marked by dysfunction and violence. His father, described by Garavito as a womanizer, was an alcoholic who physically abused the family. Garavito later claimed, "I had the misfortune of being in a family that spent its time arguing, fighting, and throwing words of great caliber." The family environment was so terrifying that Garavito and his siblings would hide from their father, who only interacted with his children for work-related purposes and errands, frequently berating them. Garavito also alleged that he was sexually abused by 2 male neighbors during his childhood, experiences that would later form part of his psychological profile. Garavito's formal education ended early when his father pulled him from the 5th grade at Simón Bolívar School in 1968 to help with the family's financial struggles. This abrupt end to his schooling left him with limited literacy and few prospects for legitimate employment. By age 16, he had left home and began drifting through Colombia, working various odd jobs including store clerk and street vendor selling prayer cards and religious icons. During his adolescence, Garavito began exhibiting disturbing behavior patterns, including cruelty toward animals. At age 16, he was arrested for the first time on charges of molesting a young boy, but was released when he claimed he had no intention of committing crimes. This early encounter with the justice system marked the beginning of what would become an escalating pattern of predatory behavior. Garavito's early adult years were marked by instability and increasing psychological problems. He developed a severe alcohol addiction and was known for his violent temper. According to police reports, he attempted suicide at one point and consequently spent 5 years in psychiatric care. On January 25, 1984, his 27th birthday, Garavito suffered a mental breakdown and was housed under psychiatric care for 33 days, during which he was prescribed antipsychotic medication and referred to psychotherapy for depression. During his psychiatric treatment, Garavito discovered Adolf Hitler's autobiography, Mein Kampf, and became obsessed with the Nazi leader. He drew parallels between their lives, including traumatic childhoods and experiences of vagrancy. This obsession would later manifest in his crimes, as he told investigators that he liked the concentration camps and admired the mass graves of the Holocaust. Garavito's transition from sexual assault to murder began on October 4, 1992, when he encountered 13-year-old Juan Carlos walking near a bazaar in Tuluá. According to Garavito's later confession, the reflection of the moonlight in the river had invoked a strange force within him, reminding him of his childhood and enraging him. He followed the child, purchasing synthetic rope and a butcher's knife along the way, before offering him work for 500 to 1,000 pesos. This first murder established the pattern that would define Garavito's 7-year reign of terror. His modus operandi was methodical and calculated. He would target boys between the ages of 6 and 16 from impoverished backgrounds. homeless children, peasants, and orphans who lived on the streets looking for food or safety. These vulnerable children, already marginalized by society, became easy prey for a predator who understood how to exploit their desperation. Garavito's ability to approach children without arousing suspicion was enhanced by his unremarkable physical appearance. Standing just 5 feet 5 inches tall with a slight build, metal-rimmed glasses, and a disarming smile, he appeared completely unthreatening. This benign appearance, combined with his skill at manipulation, allowed him to gain the trust of his victims with devastating effect. The geographic scope of Garavito's crimes was enormous, spanning at least 11 of Colombia's 32 departments and extending into Ecuador and Venezuela. He operated primarily in the western state of Risaralda, where 41 bodies were eventually discovered around the capital city of Pereira. The neighboring Valle del Cauca department accounted for another 27 victims, demonstrating the systematic nature of his predatory behavior. Garavito's strategy involved constant movement and the use of multiple identities to avoid detection. He would arrive in a new town or city, quickly identify vulnerable children, and commit his crimes before moving on. This nomadic lifestyle was facilitated by Colombia's fragmented law enforcement system, which lacked communication between different jurisdictions and had no unified database for missing persons. To gain access to his victims, Garavito employed elaborate disguises and deception techniques. Most commonly, he posed as a monk or priest, earning him the nickname El Cura, the priest, in Colombian media. He would also disguise himself as a farmer, an elderly man, a homeless person, or a street vendor, always adapting his appearance to seem trustworthy to potential victims. Garavito's approach to his victims followed a consistent pattern that revealed both his cunning and his complete lack of empathy. He would approach children on crowded streets or in rural areas, offering them small gifts such as money, candy, or employment opportunities. His promises were carefully crafted to appeal to the specific needs of street children: food, shelter, or legitimate work. Once he had gained a child's trust, Garavito would lead them away from populated areas to remote locations near railroad tracks or in overgrown jungle areas. He deliberately chose secluded spots that reduced the risk of evidence recovery and minimized the chance of witness intervention. His knowledge of Colombia's geography and transportation networks allowed him to select locations that would delay the discovery of bodies. The actual crimes committed by Garavito were of unimaginable brutality. After isolating his victims, he would bind their wrists and subject them to prolonged torture and sexual assault. The recovered bodies showed evidence of extensive suffering: bite marks, stab wounds, mutilated genitals, and signs of prolonged torture. In many cases, victims were decapitated while still alive or had their throats cut, with their severed genitals placed in their mouths. Forensic evidence revealed that Garavito often consumed alcohol during his crimes, with empty bottles of cheap Colombian brandy found near many crime scenes. He could only achieve sexual gratification through violence, often requiring the act of beating and stabbing his victims during the assault. Containers of lubricant were also discovered at crime scenes, providing additional forensic evidence of the sexual nature of the attacks. What distinguished Garavito from many other serial killers was his compulsive need to document and commemorate his crimes. For years, he maintained a black cloth suitcase containing a macabre collection of evidence: newspaper clippings about missing children, detailed journals of his murders, victim identification cards, clothes, and tally marks counting his victims. Perhaps most disturbing was Garavito's collection of carnival masks, primarily depicting clowns and animals, each labeled with dates and locations corresponding to the disappearance of a child. Some masks bore brown stains later confirmed to be blood. This collection served as both a trophy case and a meticulous record of his crimes, revealing the organized and methodical nature of his killing spree. Garavito also collected amputated toes from his victims as trophies, though he later disposed of them out of fear that Colombian National Police scent dogs might trace them back to him. This behavior demonstrated both his awareness of investigative techniques and his desire to maintain physical mementos of his crimes. The investigation into Garavito's crimes was hindered by multiple factors that allowed him to operate undetected for nearly 7 years. Colombia's lack of a unified missing persons database meant that police departments in different regions had no standardized system to share information about disappearances. This fragmentation allowed Garavito to operate across jurisdictional boundaries without detection. The social context of 1990s Colombia also worked in Garavito's favor. Street children were so common in urban areas, selling newspapers, shining shoes, or begging at intersections, that their disappearances often went unnoticed. As one street vendor observed, if rich kids were disappearing like that, the cops would have been all over the case from day one. This socioeconomic disparity meant that Garavito's victims were among society's most invisible and vulnerable members. Most of the missing children had no fingerprint or dental records, making victim identification extremely difficult. Investigators had to rely primarily on DNA evidence and the expertise of forensic reconstructionist Mario Artunduaga to identify remains. The lack of standard identification methods created additional challenges for authorities trying to connect the crimes. The first major breakthrough in the case came in November 1997, with the gruesome discovery of a mass grave near Pereira, containing the remains of 36 children. The scale and brutality of this find prompted authorities to launch a nationwide manhunt, finally recognizing that a serial killer was operating across Colombia. Initially, investigators theorized that satanic cults or international trafficking rings might be responsible for the deaths. However, careful analysis of the evidence revealed patterns that pointed to a single perpetrator. The consistent method of killing, primarily throat wounds or decapitation, along with signs of sexual assault and prolonged torture, suggested the work of one highly organized killer. The investigation gained momentum when Detective Aldemar Duran made crucial connections between seemingly unrelated pieces of evidence. A pair of partially burned eyeglasses found at one crime scene helped investigators determine that the killer had astigmatism in his left eye. This specific detail would later prove instrumental in linking Garavito to the crimes. Forensic investigators also discovered that Garavito used a particular type of liquor bottle at many crime scenes. He would bring bottles of cheap Colombian brandy, consume the alcohol while committing his crimes, and often leave the empty bottles behind. These bottles eventually became key indicators linking crime scenes across different regions of Colombia. Garavito's downfall began on April 22, 1999, in the town of Villavicencio, when he attempted to sexually assault 12-year-old John Ivan Sabogal. Unlike his previous crimes, this attack did not go as planned. A young witness observed the assault and intervened, rescuing the boy and immediately notifying police. When authorities arrested Garavito for the attempted assault, they had no idea they had captured one of the world's most prolific serial killers. Initially held on the single charge, Garavito was interrogated about other crimes as investigators began to notice similarities between his description and eyewitness accounts from other cases. The breakthrough came when police traced Garavito's family and discovered the black suitcase in his girlfriend's possession. Inside were newspaper clippings of missing children, detailed journals documenting his murders, and the collection of carnival masks that would become central evidence in his prosecution. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Garavito's carefully maintained facade finally crumbled. Under interrogation by Colombian National Police, Garavito initially confessed to sexually assaulting and murdering 140 boys aged between 8 and 16 years across 54 cities in Colombia over a 7-year period. He even drew detailed maps to burial sites, helping investigators locate remains that had been undiscovered for years. Garavito's confessions were corroborated through multiple forms of evidence. The eyeglasses found at crime scenes matched his specific prescription for astigmatism. DNA evidence linked him to empty liquor bottles and other physical evidence found at various crime scenes. His detailed knowledge of crime locations and victim information convinced investigators that they had found their perpetrator. As the investigation progressed, Garavito continued to confess to additional murders, eventually admitting to killing at least 189 children in Colombia and 4 more in Ecuador. In a 2003 confession, he claimed to have murdered an additional 23 minors and 5 adults, potentially raising his victim count to 221, though not all of these claims have been verified. What emerged from Garavito's confessions was a clear psychological profile of a highly organized killer who derived pleasure not only from the act of murder, but from the planning and documentation of his crimes. He admitted that toward the end of his killing spree, he had grown weary of murdering children and was planning a mass murder of adults to attract media attention, possibly resulting in his own death. Garavito's trial began in 1999 and concluded in 2001 with his conviction on 138 counts of murder, along with numerous charges of rape, torture, and kidnapping. The court ruled that he should serve sentences totaling 1,853 years and 9 days in prison, one of the longest sentences in criminal history. However, Colombian law at the time limited prison sentences to a maximum of 40 years, regardless of the crimes committed. This legal limitation was seen as a significant deficiency in the law, caused by the failure to anticipate the possibility of a serial killer of Garavito's magnitude in Colombian society. The law has since been amended to increase the maximum penalty for such crimes to 60 years. Garavito's sentence was further reduced due to his cooperation with authorities in locating victims' remains. His assistance in drawing maps to burial sites and providing detailed information about his crimes earned him a reduction to 22 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 3/5 of his sentence. The relatively lenient sentence sparked outrage among Colombians, many of whom argued that Garavito deserved either life imprisonment or the death penalty, neither of which existed in Colombian law. Critics viewed the sentence as inadequate punishment for crimes that had traumatized an entire nation and devastated hundreds of families. Following his conviction, Garavito was incarcerated in an isolated maximum security prison, kept separate from other prisoners for his own protection. Guards described him as relaxed, positive, and respectful during his imprisonment. He spent his time studying political science and expressed intentions to start a political career focused on helping abused children upon his release. The irony of Garavito's stated desire to help abused children was not lost on observers, given that he had abused over 300 children himself. This disconnect between his crimes and his expressed intentions demonstrated the complex psychological profile of a man capable of extreme compartmentalization and manipulation. In 2006, television journalist Guillermo Prieto Piri La Rota interviewed Garavito for a broadcast program. During the interview, Garavito attempted to minimize his actions and expressed his political ambitions. Piri noted that due to good behavior, Garavito could potentially have applied for early release, a prospect that horrified many Colombians. Psychological evaluations revealed that Garavito possessed several characteristics that made him an effective serial killer: adept social judgment, personality traits of orderliness and control, paranoid vigilance, and an exceptional ability to compartmentalize emotions. These traits, combined with his unassuming appearance, allowed him to operate undetected for years. The Garavito case exposed serious deficiencies in Colombia's criminal justice system and prompted significant reforms. The lack of communication between law enforcement agencies in different regions had allowed the killer to operate across jurisdictional boundaries without detection. This led to the establishment of better information sharing protocols and the creation of a national database for missing persons. The case also highlighted the vulnerability of Colombia's street children and the need for better social services and protection for at-risk youth. The fact that so many children could disappear without investigation or even reports being filed revealed the extent to which society had failed its most vulnerable members. Forensic techniques employed in the Garavito investigation, including early geographic profiling methods and DNA analysis, represented significant advances for Colombian law enforcement. Investigators manually plotted crime scenes on large paper maps to establish connections between crimes committed hundreds of miles apart, revealing Garavito's movement patterns along Colombia's transportation corridors. The case also led to improved training for law enforcement officers in recognizing patterns of serial crime and coordinating multi-jurisdictional investigations. The lessons learned from the Garavito investigation have been applied to subsequent cases and have helped prevent similar crimes from going undetected for extended periods. Behind the statistics and legal proceedings were hundreds of families whose lives were forever shattered by Garavito's crimes. Many families never received closure, as their children's bodies were never found or identified. The psychological trauma experienced by these families was compounded by the knowledge that their children had suffered prolonged torture before death. The victims themselves represented the most vulnerable members of Colombian society: children from broken homes, street children without family support, and orphans with no one to protect them. Their ages ranged from 6 to 16 years, with most being between 8 and 13 years old. Each represented a life cut short, dreams unfulfilled, and potential unrealized. Some communities where Garavito operated have established memorials for the victims, often in the form of playground improvements or children's libraries. The town of Genova, where several victims were found, transformed an abandoned field near a discovery site into El Parque de Los Angeles, the Angels Park, featuring flowering trees, one for each confirmed victim. Survivor accounts, though rare, provided crucial testimony about Garavito's methods. One of the few known survivors, William Trujillo Mora, who was 9 years old when attacked in 1979, described being held captive for 12 hours before escaping when Garavito lost consciousness from drinking. His testimony provided valuable insights into the killer's behavior patterns. The Garavito case attracted international attention and prompted comparisons with other prolific serial killers worldwide. With at least 193 confirmed victims, Garavito surpassed most other known serial killers in terms of victim count, earning him the grim distinction of being one of the most prolific killers in modern history. International criminologists and forensic experts studied the case to better understand the psychology of serial killers who target children. The systematic nature of Garavito's crimes, his ability to evade detection for years, and his detailed documentation of his actions provided valuable insights into criminal behavior patterns. The case also highlighted the global problem of vulnerable children and the need for international cooperation in protecting at-risk youth. Garavito's crimes extended beyond Colombia's borders into Ecuador and Venezuela, demonstrating how predators can exploit weak border controls and limited international law enforcement cooperation. In his later years in prison, Garavito continued to confess to additional murders and provided information about burial sites that had not been discovered. His ongoing confessions suggested that the true scope of his crimes might never be fully known, with some estimates placing his victim count as high as 400 children. In 2020, Garavito was diagnosed with leukemia and placed on medical discharge. He was transferred between hospitals and maximum security prisons throughout his treatment, continuing to serve his sentence under strict security measures. Despite his illness, many Colombians remained opposed to any possibility of his early release. Former President Iván Duque publicly rejected any possibility of Garavito regaining his freedom, assuring the public that during his administration, the killer would stay in prison. This political stance reflected the continued public outrage over Garavito's crimes and the perceived inadequacy of his sentence. On October 12, 2023, Luis Alfredo Garavito died in a hospital in Valledupar, northern Colombia, at the age of 66. The cause of death was not immediately revealed, though he had been battling terminal cancer. His death brought an end to one of the most horrific criminal careers in modern history, though the trauma inflicted on Colombian society continues to resonate. The legacy of Luis Garavito extends far beyond his death. His crimes fundamentally changed how Colombia approaches child protection, criminal investigation, and victim advocacy. The case led to significant improvements in law enforcement coordination and the establishment of better support systems for vulnerable children. The Garavito case also demonstrated the importance of taking missing children reports seriously, regardless of the socioeconomic status of the victims. The initial dismissal of disappearances as isolated incidents allowed the killer to operate for years before being detected, highlighting the need for more proactive investigation of missing persons cases. Modern forensic techniques that were not available during Garavito's active period, including advanced DNA analysis, digital communication monitoring, and sophisticated geographic profiling, would likely have led to his capture much earlier. These technological advances serve as important tools in preventing similar crimes. The psychological profile developed for Garavito has contributed to the understanding of serial killers who target children. His case demonstrated how predators can exploit societal vulnerabilities and use legitimate activities as cover for criminal behavior. This knowledge has informed training programs for law enforcement and social workers. Today's Colombia has implemented numerous reforms aimed at protecting vulnerable children and preventing crimes like those committed by Garavito. These include improved social services for street children, better coordination between law enforcement agencies, and enhanced legal protections for minors. However, challenges remain. Colombia continues to struggle with violence, displacement, and poverty, conditions that create vulnerable populations susceptible to exploitation. The lessons learned from the Garavito case serve as a constant reminder of the need for vigilance in protecting society's most vulnerable members. Educational programs in Colombian schools now include components on personal safety and recognizing potentially dangerous situations. These programs aim to empower children with knowledge that might help them avoid becoming victims of predators while also encouraging them to report suspicious behavior to trusted adults. The case has also influenced legislation and policy in other Latin American countries, many of which have faced similar challenges with missing children and inadequate law enforcement coordination. International organizations use the Garavito case as an example of the importance of cross-border cooperation in combating crimes against children. The story of Luis Garavito, La Bestia, stands as one of the darkest chapters in Colombia's history, a testament to the capacity for human evil and the devastating consequences when society fails to protect its most vulnerable members. His crimes claim the lives of at least 193 children, each representing a life cut short, a family destroyed, and a community traumatized. Yet from this darkness has emerged important lessons about the need for comprehensive child protection systems, effective law enforcement coordination, and social policies that address the root causes of vulnerability. The communities that suffered under Garavito's reign of terror have shown remarkable resilience, transforming sites of tragedy into places of remembrance and hope. The children's playgrounds, libraries, and memorial parks that now mark some of the locations where victims were found serve as powerful reminders that even in the face of unimaginable evil, communities can come together to honor the dead and protect the living. These spaces represent not just remembrance, but a commitment to ensuring that such tragedies never happen again. As we reflect on the case of Luis Garavito, we are reminded of the fundamental responsibility that society bears toward its children. Every child deserves protection, love, and the opportunity to grow up free from fear. The victims of La Bestia did not receive that protection, but their memory continues to inspire efforts to create a safer world for all children. The Beast of Colombia is gone, but the lessons of his crimes live on. In remembering these children and working to prevent future tragedies, we honor their memory and reaffirm our commitment to protecting the innocent. Only through such vigilance and dedication can we hope to prevent another Luis Garavito from emerging from the shadows to prey upon the vulnerable. If this exploration into one of history's most heinous criminal cases has moved you, please remember that behind every statistic was a child with hopes, dreams, and loved ones who mourn their loss. Their stories serve as a powerful reminder of our collective responsibility to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Some crimes stain not only the pages of history, but the soul of a nation. The story of Luis Garavito isn't just about monstrous acts. It's about the children who were never found, the families still grieving, and a society that vowed never to look away again. If this story moved you, disturbed you, or opened your eyes, we ask that you like, share, and subscribe to Weird World Wonders, where we uncover the darkest truths and honor the lives caught in the shadows. Until next time, stay aware, stay compassionate, and never stop asking, how do we protect the innocent from the evils that wear a human face? Be sure to like, share, and subscribe.